we will depend on them for every seed we grow, of every crop we grow. If they control seed, they control food, they know it, it's strategic, it's more powerful than bombs, it's more powerful than guns. This is the best way to control the populations of the world.
Let me assure you that absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO-FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths. 1 billion through simple starvation. Those folks who die are not particularly economically successful from the point of view of the corporations, but the next 2 billion, they will die from the preventable diseases of undernutrition. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients.
Well, if you've been listening to this program for the last few years and have been listening to very much about nutrition, you realize that you've been hearing about a silent killer. It's a killer that's worse than alcohol, worse than nicotine, worse than drugs. It's called monosodium glutamate. And most people don't know that MSG is in thousands of processed food, often under hidden name, probably in your kitchen cabinets. And now some doctors say this flavor booster could be boosting your weight. This is going to be the first of a 4-part series, today, tomorrow, and then 2 next week, by medical reporter Galen Tethrow on the dangers of MSG.
MSG. You may think it's only an ingredient in Asian food, but you're wrong. It's everywhere. From restaurants to your grocery to your kids' school cafeterias, even your baby's formula. Monosodium glutamate is a flavor enhancer that's been big in the U.S. since the 50s. It's supposed to make your food taste better, but research shows MSG is making us fat.
It's very difficult to exercise off. It's very difficult to diet off. And these infant animals that become obese tend to become what we refer to as couch potatoes.
Dr. Russell Blaylock has studied these common flavor enhancers that many experts believe are hazardous to your health. He calls them excitotoxins, the taste that kills. An excitotoxin is a big word for any substance like MSG that overexcites cells to the point of damage, acting as a toxin, hence the term excitotoxin, a form of poison. The FDA considers MSG safe, but numerous scientists have found that glutamate in the diet can cause a range of problems in animals, including obesity.
These foods, particularly in a child, is certainly of the dose equal to what you're seeing in animals. Now, the thing that's peculiar about the child, they're 4 times more sensitive than an adult.
Pound for pound.
Pound for pound.
So babies in the womb and young children up to about age 3 are the most threatened. That means expectant mothers may need to be mindful of their diets. And when the babies are born, moms may want to watch out for formula. Nearly all formulas contain processed milk or soy protein. Because of the processing, these proteins are broken down into MSG and related excitotoxins.
The other curious thing about exposing animals to MSG early in life is they prefer sweet foods, foods with sugar in it, carbohydrate foods, and they stay away from the foods that are healthier.
And that can contribute to obesity throughout life and can make it almost impossible to lose weight. So is the public getting enough MSG in their food to trigger obesity? Estimates for MSG consumption vary widely, but almost everyone acknowledges significant and steady increases in the diet since 1960. And that may relate directly to government figures on excess pounds. Over the last 40 years, the government says adult obesity has jumped from 13% to 34%, and the number of overweight youth has quadrupled to almost 20%, with a steady rise for 40 years. Of course, that doesn't necessarily prove the MSG has caused the increased obesity. But Dr. John Olney, a pioneer in brain research, first found MSG caused obesity in lab animals in the 1960s. And Blaylock says the MSG theory makes much more sense than any other possible cause, such as lack of exercise. One of the frightening obesity effects of MSG is that it produces the harmful fat found deep in the abdomen.
And we know people that have a lot of visceral type fat have an extremely high incidence of heart attack and stroke and arteriosclerosis.
They're also more likely to suffer from insomnia, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and high cholesterol. Blaylock says to reduce MSG intake, consumers will have to pick foods more carefully.
Because there's intense competition between the food companies for taste and for customers. And customers choose foods based on taste mostly. So if you can add a lot of this taste-enhancing MSG, you produce this effect.
With obesity continuing to rise, ignoring the MSG component could mean there's no end in sight for the ravages of excess pounds. Reporting from Jackson, Mississippi, I'm Galen Tethrow, CBN News.
Well, that's the first of a 4-part series. Ladies and gentlemen, there's hardly a restaurant you can go to, especially Chinese. Chinese is noted for MSG in the food. It's one of the reasons people have headaches when they get through eating Chinese. It's the MSG. But it's used to flavor almost everything, hamburgers, steaks, you name it, it's there. Well, here's some of the other names that this silent killer is lurking as. Aspartame broth, casein or caseinate, glutamate, hydrolyzed or autolyzed yeast, and hydrolyzed protein. Well, you can learn more about what foods contain MSG if you log on to cbn.com. And tomorrow, in part 2 of our series on MSG, we'll look at how it affects your brain and nervous system. You know, it's a hidden killer.
It's hidden, and when I was watching that story and reading about it, I literally wanted to get a list and print out the list so that I could check my cupboards and check my kitchen, because not just for me, but for my son. I want to make sure that I'm not giving him something that I don't know I'm giving
Baby food, soup.
Yeah.
Almost every kind of soup has this kind of stuff in it, and you go down the line because it makes food taste good, and it kills you while it's making taste good. All right, what's
Every genetic engineer I've talked to who worked at these large companies said that in the different studies of GMO potatoes, rice, you name it, that there would be the side effect of reducing fertility in the rodents, the rats, the mice, the guinea pigs that they tested it on.
Those that ate the genetically engineered soy, they didn't actually show the problems in the first generation. The second generation was slower growth, slower onset for maturity, but by the third generation, that's when nearly all of the adults had lost the ability to have babies.
And then later in primate studies with monkeys and apes, the same thing happened. And that along with the public trait that these organisms are being engineered for, there are other traits quietly being built in as a Trojan horse that cause biological changes in the body, that increase cancer, that reduce fertility. And these developments are a lot further along than the public has even been told. The information is available, but it's not an issue that gets a lot of media play.
As a matter of fact, there is. Let me give you an example of what we're talking about. There are certain tomatoes. First of all, a normal tomato, when it's grown organically or in your backyard in a pot, if you choose to do so, basically one of the threats to it is a tomato weevil. But the biotechnologists have discovered that if they can splice in a gene that makes the tomato weevil sense that that tomato is actually part of one of its own predators, it's going to leave that tomato alone. The problem is that whenever you do that with any kind of genetically modified organism, you're creating problems with when it's ingested into the human body. And what I mean by that is that we're biologically created or made to sense when something is truly organic or if it's not. And if you're finding something that is kind of a mixture, if you will, of these substances, the body's immune system senses that as other and starts to attack. And ultimately, it can attack itself, and it can be the root cause of many autoimmune disorders where the body literally starts to destroy itself.
And let me just point out, when you say add these, as opposed to a hybrid, say you're doing a hybrid tomato or a hybrid strawberry, a hybrid is actually breeding one kind of tomato with another kind of tomato. But with genetically engineered, you're taking two different species. So for example, with the strawberry, strawberry has a tendency to have a vulnerability to frost. So what they have done is they have taken it's a fish in the North Atlantic that has a built-in sort of a freon in it. It's got a chemical that keeps it from freezing in North Atlantic waters. So what they've done is take the gene from that fish and they've spliced it in to the genes of the strawberry so that the strawberry is now not vulnerable to frost.
Yep.
Now, as you say, you know, we're sort of creating Frankenstein food, and by doing that, we really do not know how our body's immune system, which genetically has been sort of carried on from ancestor to ancestor to identify friend and foe. Now we're introducing new types of protein configurations in these new foods. And we are concerned, and there is a major concern. I know you in your practice and myself in my practice, I do a lot of allergy testing and food allergy sensitivities. And it is amazing the kinds of food sensitivities that's coming back in these lab reports. I mean, people are suddenly sensitive to lettuce or food sensitivities to very, very benign, what would be traditionally not considered hyperallergenic foods. They're becoming more sensitive and more allergic to these foods. And so we don't know where this is going to go. And it is big corp
such as companies such as Monsanto and companies like that, that are really pushing the political envelope to make sure that they have the upper hand in the industry.
Absolutely, and that brings up.
Now, before we get to the debate, I've got to tell you about one story. The FDA is currently in the process of approving the first genetically engineered animal for human consumption. It's a super salmon. The FDA will hold a public hearing in September on whether the salmon should be labeled as genetically modified if they allow it on the market. And that's considered a key issue in whether the public will actually buy the fish and have it showing up on their dinner plates. The salmon's being developed by Aqua Bounty Technologies of Massachusetts. And get this, it grows to the market size weight in just half of the usual time. And there's a reason for its quick growth.
Well, we're here at the 15th International Congress on Anti-Aging Medicine and Regenerative Medical Biotechnologies. We're here with Jeff Smith, who just gave a very fascinating presentation to our audience on the health effects, the longevity effects, the risks, benefits, really not too many benefits that you mentioned, that had to do with genetically modified organisms, genetically modified foods. Why don't you just summarize this for us?
Well, over the last 2 years, I've worked with more than 30 scientists to collect all the known health risks of genetically engineered foods. And we found thousands of sick, sterile, and dead animals, thousands of people linking toxic and allergic type reactions to these foods, damage to virtually every system in lab animals studied, and numerous ways in which these foods can create unpredicted side effects. We found that the actual assumptions that were used as the basis for safety claims, most of them have proven untrue.
Let's back up for a second. Explain real quickly, what is a genetically modified organism?
You take the gene from one species and you ram it into the DNA of another species.
But you're talking about like with wheat or rye or
Actually,
what?
the four major ones are soy, corn, cotton, and canola. Those are the four major genetically engineered crops, and they have two major traits. About 80% are genetically engineered not to die when sprayed with herbicide, and about 20% are engineered to produce their own pesticide. Now, there's also a little bit of zucchini, crookneck squash, and Hawaiian papaya that are genetically engineered to resist disease, but that's a tiny percentage of the crops that are out there.
And these foods are already in the marketplace. We're eating these foods.
Absolutely. In fact, 70% of the foods in the supermarkets approximately contain derivatives of soy, corn, cottonseed, or canola. So
70% of the foods we're already eating have genetically modified organisms in them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, continue.
Well, let's take a look at soy, for example. Now, soon after genetically engineered soy was introduced to the UK, soy allergies skyrocketed by 50%. We know that the actual genetically engineered soy has much higher levels of a known allergen, trypsin inhibitor. It has new proteins in it that have allergenic properties. It also has an effect of reducing the amount of digestive enzymes in the pancreas in mice, which could cause a reduction in the speed of breakdown of proteins, which could make them more allergenic. It has more herbicide residues, which also might cause reactions. Now, when genetically modified soy was fed to mice and rabbits, they had damage in virtually every organ that was studied. And what was particularly interesting was that the young sperm cells were altered, the embryos were altered, and when rats were fed genetically engineered soy, more than 50% of the offspring died within 3 weeks.
Wait a second here. So how on earth can you have a food that causes so many adverse side effects in the laboratory testing, make it past FDA and governmental regulatory agencies when they are like flies on cotton candy at the state fair when it comes to any nutritional product, supposedly any drugs, though we know that that's not always the case, but where their job, 100% of their job is spent on looking for side effects, adverse reactions, and to keep the food and the drug supply of this country safe. How could these things get past them when it's so obviously dangerous?
Well, the FDA has no safety test requirements for genetically engineered foods.
Why not?
Because in 1992, they came up with a policy, and in the policy it had a statement that said the agency is not aware of any information showing that these foods created from these new methods differ in any meaningful or uniform way. On that basis, they said the companies themselves can determine if the foods are safe. They don't even have to tell us if they're introducing a genetically engineered food into the market. Now, 7 years later, 44,000 documents were made public from the internal files of the FDA, showing that that sentence was a lie. The person in charge of policy at the FDA was Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney and later Monsanto's vice president. And the FDA was under orders from the White House to promote the biotechnology industry. And so it turns out that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists at the FDA were that these foods were inherently dangerous and could create hard-to-detect allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. They had urged their superiors to require long-term studies, but were ignored and denied by the political appointees. Now, years later, those untested assumptions that were used as the basis for safety approvals turn out to be untrue.
Whose White House was it? Is this the Clinton administration?
First Bush administration.
The first Bush administration.
Right.
Oh, surprise, surprise. What can viewers of this video do? What can the general public do? I watched the video, I'm like aghast. I won't be able to eat another burrito as long as I live. What on earth can I do about it?
Two things. First, avoid eating genetically engineered foods, and here's how. 3 choices. Buy organic, buy products that say non-GMO or are on non-GMO shopping guides. Or 3, avoid products that are at risk in the labels. So, if you pick up a tomato sauce and it has soybean oil and high fructose corn syrup, put that back and take the tomato sauce that has olive oil, which is not genetically engineered. So learn, and you can go to spend in Europe as a model for here. In 1 week, following the announcement of Unilever committing publicly to remove genetically engineered ingredients from its European brands, virtually every major manufacturer followed suit with the same commitment for the European brands because that had reached the tipping point of consumer concern.
David Carpenter is one of the most qualified specialists in the field. He carried out the testing for the Anniston residents.
We all have PCBs in our bodies. The polar bears and the penguins have PCBs. And what has happened is in the past, there were a few sites where PCBs were released, but over time, they've gone into the air, they've gone into the water, they've transported, so the whole world is now contaminated with PCBs. The issue is that many diseases are caused by PCB exposure. The one everyone knows about is cancer. Women that get pregnant and have PCBs in their body will have a child with a reduced IQ. PCBs cause reduced thyroid function. PCBs interfere with sex hormones.
The big surprise was that Roundup has an effect on cell division. We saw very quickly that Roundup affected a key process in cell division. Not the cell division mechanisms themselves, but those which control cell division. You have to understand how cells become cancerous. In the beginning, all cells are benign, and then at a certain point, modifications take place in the cells that make them unstable from a genetic point of view. This is the first malfunction that we observed with Roundup. It is for that reason that we consider that Roundup provokes the first stages that lead to cancer. We're careful not to say it provokes cancer, because we won't see the cancers develop for 30 or 40 years. It was immediately clear how important these findings were for product users, especially since the tested doses were well below those which people normally use, and we said to ourselves, gosh, we really have to let the public know about the dangers as quickly as we can. And I thought the best way to do that was to talk to my administration. But there, I was shocked, very, very shocked, because I was told, ordered rather, not to communicate our findings due to the GMO question lurking in the background.
They must have been thoroughly tested before being put on the market. Who was the Secretary of Agriculture at the time? Dan Glickman, Bill Clinton's ag secretary from 1995 to 2000.
What I found in the early years I was involved in the regulation of biotechnology, that there was a general feeling in agribusiness and inside our government in the U.S. that if you weren't marching lockstep forward in favor of rapid approvals of biotech products, rapid approvals of GMO crops, then somehow you were anti-science and anti-progress. Well, I think that, frankly, there were a lot of folks in industrial agriculture who didn't want as much analysis as probably we should have had because they had made a huge amount of investments in the product. I mean, I think that, and certainly when I became secretary, given the fact that I was in charge of the department regulating agriculture, I had a lot of pressure on me not to push the issue too far, so to speak. But I would say even when I opened my mouth in the Clinton administration, I got slapped around a little bit by not only the industry, but also some of the people even in the administration. In fact, I made a speech once where saying that we needed to more thoughtfully think through the regulatory issues on GMOs. And I had some people within the Clinton administration, particularly in the U.S. trade area, that were very upset with me. They said, how could you in agriculture be questioning our regulatory regime?
The reason why GM crops are here is based on a deception that occurred in the FDA. They said that these foods are not different. They use the word substantially equivalent. They use the word not meaningfully or uniformly different. And what that turned into was a terminology called generally recognized as safe, or GRAS. Typically, if something is to be considered generally recognized as safe, it needs lots of peer-reviewed published studies and an overwhelming consensus among the scientific community. With GM crops, they had neither.
I have never seen a situation where one company could have so much overwhelming influence at the highest levels of regulatory decision-making as the example of Monsanto with its GM food policy in the government.
Exceptional news footage actually shows George Bush Sr. visiting Monsanto's research facility 9 years before Roundup-ready soybeans were first sold.
What I'd like to do today is show you some of the steps we go.
So Monsanto played that game very well, both the political game and the regulatory game. They played a key role in bovine growth hormone in getting that thing approved and also in how genetic engineering was dealt with.
Michael Hansen has just mentioned bovine growth hormone. What's that? It's a transgenic hormone that's injected into cows, increasing dairy production by 20%. It would be an understatement to say that it had critics. The hormone threatens our health. Deadly poison. Manipulation. Called RBGH for recombinant bovine growth hormone, Monsanto began selling it to dairy farmers in 1994 under the brand name Posilac. The scoop was based on the secret documents that the two men scrutinized.
One morning, I came in, I think in October of that year, I came into my office and found a great big box of documents. And it came from Washington, but no indication as to who sent it. This was a box of files of all Monsanto records which had been submitted to the FDA on the veterinary tests in the preceding 6 years or so. Well, this was great fun.
Many of these documents are original documents, and as it says here, company confidential. It contains confidential information which may not be reproduced, revealed to unauthorized persons, or sent outside the company without proper authorization. As an investigative journalist, that's the kind of stuff I like to report. Revealing this information made Monsanto and FDA very, very angry, because what we were able to establish is that there were dramatic physiological changes in the animals that received the shot, the hormone shots, compared to their control group peers. For example, we see the ovaries of the cows receiving the synthetic hormone in the different treatment groups were, for the right ovaries, 34% larger, 42% larger, and 44% larger. Elsewhere in the stolen files, it shows how there were severe problems with the reproduction of these treated animals.
The reason the FDA approved it is it appeared to be that there was a lot of people that used to work at, had key positions that had worked for Monsanto, came over to the FDA and managed to get the FDA to approve it.
It's revolving doors that move up. It's kind of like a double helix, a spiral.
Revolving door?
Yes, revolving door.
The revolving door is not just in agriculture. It tends to be in many, many areas.
Donald Rumsfeld was the CEO of Searle, which was a Monsanto subsidiary. The former U.S. Trade Ambassador, Mickey Cantor, ended up on Monsanto's board. Supreme Court Judge Clarence Thomas used to work for Monsanto.
Monsanto. Lawyer Stephen Drucker represents a coalition of nonprofit associations. He sued the FDA, forcing it to declassify its internal files on GMOs.
We received over 44,000 pages from the FDA's own files, and they revealed that the FDA has been lying to the world since 1992, if not before. But they continue to lie. They are still lying. They claim that there's an overwhelming consensus in the scientific community that genetically engineered foods are as safe as their conventionally produced counterparts. And they claim that there has been sufficient data to back up this consensus. Both of those claims are blatant lies. Even before the consistent warnings in the memos from the FDA's own scientists, the FDA had very clear warning, because the very first genetically engineered food supplement that came to market in the United States caused a major epidemic that killed dozens of people and made hundreds and hundreds sick.
It caused an epidemic of an unusual disease called EMS.
Right.
And how many people died?
Right, but we have many...
37, and more than 1,000 people disabled. Do you remember?
I do remember.
And you said, according to FDA administrative record, we do not yet know the cause of EMS, nor can we rule out the engineering of the organism. Did you say that? What I read?
Yes.
One thing is sure. Thanks to this limited study, Monsanto's GMOs have inundated the world, principally in North and South America, Asia, and Australia. After only 10 years, transgenic crops now cover 250 million acres. 70% are Roundup resistant, and 30% have been genetically modified to produce an insecticide called Bt. Between 1995 and 2005, Monsanto acquired over 50 seed companies throughout the world. These companies produce corn, cotton, wheat, and soybean, and also seeds for tomatoes, potatoes, and sorghum. Everywhere, people worry about Monsanto's monopoly, which in the long term threatens to wipe out all non-transgenic varieties. Monsanto doesn't agree and speaks only about the benefits of biotechnology, especially in developing countries like India. In 2006, the harvest was ravaged by a disease that affects transgenic cotton.
How do you explain that so many farmers are buying Bt seeds?
See, presently the option is is getting narrower and narrower to the farmer. During the current season, even farmer wanted to go for non-Bt. There was no non-Bt hybrid seed available in the market.
Today in India, Monsanto controls nearly all of the cottonseed market, forcing the locals to buy its seeds at prices 4 times higher than conventional varieties. Small farmers must turn to moneylenders who charge high interest rates. If the harvest is poor, it means bankruptcy, a vicious circle which is decimating Indian villages.
आज जे आपल्या इथं आत्महत्या झाली ती कशामुळे झाली बीटी कॉटन अजून काय कारण होतं कर्जबाजारी वय काय होतं 25 हा ही कन्झ्युम्ड पेस्टिसाइड 1 लिटर पेस्टिसाइड पहिला सुसाईड आहे का नाही
Tragedies like the one we've just witnessed occur 3 times a day in the Vidarbha region, where BT cotton was introduced in 2005. Of course, cotton farmers committing suicide is not new in India, but the GM crops are causing it to skyrocket. However, in this battle that pits David against Goliath, few dare to publicly denounce this international scandal.
This is Vidarbha's rice growing belt. So if you see the minimum suicides are there. But this is the cotton growing area. The result of the BT cotton is the first year 600 suicides from June 2005 to 2006. Second year, still today, within 6 months, 680 suicides. So it's a disaster.
It's a complete disaster, yes. All these technologies, either it is GM or biotechnology, they are actually making the farmers completely dependent on the market. Because not only that you have to pay more for the seed procurement, but you have to fertilize. And this very claim that no spraying is required, no pesticide required, is also false.
When Monsanto claims in advertising that GM crops are adapted for small farmers, what do you think it's?
Our experience shows that it is completely false. It's completely false. It's a lie.
On this day in December of 2006, a revolt was brewing in the largest cotton market in the state of Maharashtra. 3 days later, riots broke out, and dozens of small farmers, including Kishore Tiwari, were arrested.
बहुत कम भाव में ले रहे माल और काश्तकार करके परेशान हो रहे
तुमचं किती आहे बेटा कर्ज 32,000 rupees a day तुमचं 60,000 rupees a day तुमचं 50,000 rupees a day 20,000 rupees a day 50,000 rupees a day 15,000 rupees a day किती लोकांना बीटी लावायचं नाही पुढच्या 4 वर्षी they don't want to go for the BT.
They've always said genetic engineering is the way to get to patenting, but patenting is the real aim. If you look at Monsanto's research agenda, they are testing at this point something like 20 crops with BT genes in them. There's nothing they're leaving untouched. The mustard, the okra, the brinjal, the rice, the cauliflower. Once they have established the norm that seed can be owned as their property, royalties can be collected, we will depend on them for every seed we grow, of every crop we grow. If they control seed, they control food, they know it, it's strategic, it's more powerful than bombs, it's more powerful than guns. This is the best way to control the populations of the world.
Let me assure you that absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO-FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big,